All right, thank you, Jeff. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Southline Board of Education regular meeting and virtual organizational meeting, January 19th, 2021 at 7:01 p.m. Mr. Batte, will you call the roll for us, please?
Yes, I will. Mr. Leftwich.
Here.
Mrs. McDowell.
Here.
Ms. Zertel.
Here.
Mr. Schwegler.
Here.
Mr. Dashner.
I am here.
I'm here, Mr. Kennedy.
I am here. We have that establishes a quorum. May we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America,
and to the republic
which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and
justice for all. Thank you much. For those of us looking at the agenda, for those tuned in at home, the first part of our meeting is our board organizational meeting. This is the part of our duty as a board to elect our officers, verify the signatures that go on checks, and make board member committee assignments. All of our board members participate on a variety of different committees, and we take care of that at the beginning of the year after our members have been sworn in. And then after that, we'll begin our regular meeting and conduct public comments in the first part of that. Just a note on public comments. You may submit a public comment by using the link at the beginning of the agenda. We request that your remarks, if you call in, are limited to 3 minutes. You will be cut off after that, not by our doing. Technology will automatically end you at 3 minutes. We do require for your comments on that spreadsheet that link will take you to for a first and last name. We won't read any comments that are anonymous or have an obviously fake name. And those are limited to a maximum of 500 characters. If you do call in, your phone will automatically be muted, and then you will *6 on your keypad to unmute yourself when that time comes. But we'll get to that after once our regular meeting starts. So that brings us to item number 3, the election of our officers. We need to nominate and elect our president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. Any board members welcome to nominate any other board member for one of those 4 positions.
Mr. Kennedy, you've done a really nice job. You've done a really nice job for us in the interim after Carrie left. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you. I'm glad I haven't run anything off the rails.
No, it's all been great. I'd like to nominate Mr. Dashner to take over for this term as our president.
I'll second that.
Was it Mr. Leftwich?
It was Dan.
Thank you. We have a nomination by Mr. Batte for Mr. Dashner as president, seconded by Mr. Schwegler. I would assume at this point, because this is a nomination, that I think officially for the record, Mr. Dashner would need to accept the nomination, and then we would vote on it.
I do accept.
Thank you. Any other nominations for position of president? With that, I will ask Mr. Abate to call the roll.
Yes, Mr. Kennedy.
I vote yes.
I also vote yes. Mr. Dashner.
Yes.
Mr. Schwegler.
Yes.
Mrs. Zertel.
Yes.
Mrs. McDowell.
Yes.
And Mr. Leftwich.
Yes.
Congratulations, Mr. Dashner. You are our new board president. With that, if I had a gavel to hand over to you, this would be the time when I would hand you the gavel, and you would, thank you, Mr. Leftwich, for clapping. Yes, silent clap. The meeting, the rest of the meeting is yours. I will be happy to take over the public comment portion since I have the spreadsheet in front of me when that time comes.
Thank you. Thanks to all the board members for your support, and thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Definitely some big shoes to fill. Next, we have the nomination election of the vice president. Are there any nominations for vice president?
Yes, I would like to nominate Eric Kennedy. I think he's been doing a great job as a fill-in president, as well as an excellent job to date as a vice president. Yes, vice president. So Eric Kennedy.
I will second that.
And I will accept that.
Okay. Do we have any further nominations for vice president? Hearing none, Mr. Abate, can you call the roll, please?
I can. Mr. Schwegler.
Yes.
Mr. Dashner.
Yes.
I vote yes. Mr. Kennedy.
I will vote yes.
Mr. Lepwich.
Yes.
Mrs. McDowell.
Yes.
And Mrs. Ertel.
Yes.
Congratulations, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you all.
Up next, we have nomination of the election, or nomination or election of the secretary position. Do we have any nominations for the secretary?
Yeah, I think it's really good practice for us to rotate these roles and build our capacity on the board. So I'd like to step aside and offer a nomination to Mrs. Ertel to take over as secretary, please.
I will second that.
Ms. Ertel, do you accept the nomination?
I will accept. Yes, thank you.
Okay, any further nominations? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Abate, can you call the roll, please?
I can. I vote yes. Mr. Kennedy.
I vote yes.
Mr. Dashner.
I vote yes.
Mr. Schwegler.
Yes.
Mrs. Ertel.
Yes.
Mrs. McDowell.
Yes.
And Mr. Leftwich.
Yes.
Congratulations. Next, we have the nomination / election of the treasurer. Are there any nominations for the treasurer position?
Indeed, there are. Sir, I would like to nominate Mr. Schwegler for the position of our treasurer.
I will second.
And I will accept.
Any further nominations for treasurer? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Abate, can you call the roll once again?
I do believe we have a new secretary, however. I think maybe
Yes, we should pass the reins off to Ms. Ertel.
if I had something to pass, I would. Here you go.
Pass the pen.
I need a notebook and a pen now. I have to write everybody's name down so I call everybody's name right. Okay, Mr. Dashner,
I vote yes.
Mr. Kennedy,
I vote yes.
Ms. McDowell,
Yes.
Mr. Abate,
Yes.
Mr. Leftwich,
Yes.
Mr. Schwegler,
Yes.
and I vote yes. I think I got everybody.
Okay, that sets our board for the calendar year. Our next item is check signatures. I believe this basically gives the authority to the Assistant Superintendent for Business and Finance, the authority to do payroll checks, accounts payable, and bond expenditures. Mr. Kennedy, I'll ask for a little bit of guidance. Do you know if we need to do these separately, or can we do all three of these in one fell swoop?
I think we would be safe to do them all in one swoop. If I'm not mistaken, Ms. Witt and our treasurer, Mr. Schwegler, will both be signers on those documents, and then they will need to submit, Mr. Schwegler would need to submit his signature to Judy, who will get them imprinted on the checks, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, well, I'll be looking for a motion to approve the check signatures, please.
I will move to approve Ms. Witt and Mr. Schwegler as the signers for the check signatures for payroll, accounts payable, and bond expenditures.
I will second.
Okay, is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none. Mrs. Ertel, can you call the roll, please?
Sure. Mr. Kennedy,
Yes.
Mr. Schwegler,
Yes.
Mr. Abate, sorry, Mr. Abate, I didn't hear anything.
Oh, I'm sorry. I froze for a second. I know you called me. My apologies. Yes.
Mr. Leftwich,
Yes.
I vote yes. Mr. Dashner,
I vote yes.
Ms. McDowell,
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 7-0. Item number 5 on the agenda is the board member committee assignments. I'm asking to table this. I will come up with committee assignments within the next week. I didn't get feedback back from all of the board members, and I want to make sure we have that before those assignments are made. I do have most of them, just not all of them. So those assignments will be made by the end of next week. That concludes our organizational part of the meeting. We will now open up the regular meeting with item number 6, school board recognition. And I assume that that's Mr. Archibald.
It is. Thank you very much, President Dashner, and congratulations to each of our recently elected officers. Southland Community Schools is joining 544 local and 57 intermediate school districts across Michigan to celebrate January as School Board Recognition Month. School board members represent the views and priorities of the entire school community. They take their responsibilities and the public's trust very seriously, as each of you know. Each individual board member gives selflessly of their time and energy. This includes work in and outside of board meetings, attending school functions when we can, and looking forward to that in the coming future, preparing for board meetings, reviewing financial reports, agendas and proposals, making numerous and often very difficult decisions. The work of a Board of Education member often goes unrecognized. In a year full of challenges for public education, not seen in recent history, our school board members in our entire community have persevered through the adversity of 2020 to help provide for the best educational opportunities for our students. No matter the challenges that lie ahead for the district in 2021, we're in full confidence that our school board members will continue to lead in a manner that provides an exceptional education for all SLCS students. In addition to our board members, I would also like to thank their families, the families of each of the board members, as our elected officials could not do the important work that they do and spend the time that they do doing it without the strong support of their family members. Please join me as a community in recognizing the SLCS Board of Education members, Mr. Abate, Mr. Dashner, Mr. Leftwich, Ms. McDowell, Mr. Schwegler, and Ms. Ertel, for their unwavering leadership and dedicated service to Southland Community Schools. SLCS board members, thank you for all that you do. And I also understand it is customary to have a small token of appreciation. So like the gavel that we couldn't pass and the notebook that we couldn't pass, I assure each of you that I will have a small token of appreciation next time we are in person. So
Item on the agenda is item number 7, public comments. Mr. Kennedy, I believe you have the link.
Yes. Currently, we have 3 for us this evening. The first one comes from Gina, and I'm going to probably say her last name wrong. So I apologize for that. Hochraber. She wants to speak to the emotional states. Since my child has been back in school face-to-face 4 days a week, her love for school has returned. Her smile has returned, and she only hates Wednesdays of online school. If we could go back 5 days a week, the world would seem normal to her, even wearing her mask. The second one comes from Gina Glazek. When will there be a plan for getting our secondary students back to school more than 2 days per week? Most of the surrounding districts have detailed plans of how and when their students will transition to at least 4 days, many even full-time. Where is the plan for SLCS? And our third comment comes from Mr. Jim McCullough. He said he is going to call in. So if Mr. McCullough, if you *6 to unmute yourself, you can go right ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so first I'd like to start out with saying thanks for all your hard work. There's been no easy answers to the challenges of the past year, and I think the board has made the best choices in a rather bad situation. Regarding the return to full in-person student attendance, I respectfully request the board consider the following points in their decision. Number one, the conditions which drove the decision to adopt the hybrid in-person pathway back in October are still in place today. The number of new daily cases in South Lyon is the same as it was in late October. Number two, the hybrid in-person pathway maintains more social distancing than full in-person attendance. As a result, secondary school COVID transmission cases, that wording's important, during the hybrid learning path were zero. They were non-existent. No transmissions due to in-class attendance with the hybrid path. Number three, teachers have not received their vaccines. Many cannot get appointments. And then number four, the COVID vaccines are not available to the general public yet and are really not expected for secondary school student use for many months. I'd like to conclude by saying our son enjoys the hybrid format. The mix of online and in-person learning breaks up the monotony of the same day routine. He hasn't had any issues with using a learning device at home or at school. And he's also been very social over the computer, connecting with his friends at both high schools during the breaks between classes. It would be nice if students could opt to be remote on some days, regardless of the in-person schedule adopted by the board. Thank you for your time.
And thank you. Those are the only three comments that we have on the list.
Okay, and we will have a second period for public comments at the end of the meeting, or near the end of the meeting. So that brings us to section A, action items. Item number 8 is approval of agenda. Can I get a motion for the approval of the agenda, please?
Mr. Dashner, I would like to make a motion to amend the agenda to add a consideration of a proposal to adjust our meeting dates. If we could perhaps create like a 13B toward the end of our action items.
I would support that.
Okay, is there any discussion? Any further comments on the agenda? Okay, Mrs. Ertel, can you call the roll, please?
Sure. Ms. McDowell,
Yes.
Mr. Abate,
Yes.
I vote yes. Mr. Dashner,
I vote yes.
Mr. Kennedy,
I vote yes.
Mr. Schweigler,
Yes.
and Mr. Leftwich.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes 7-0. Item number 9 is the approval of minutes. We have the December 7th, 2020, December 14th, 2020, January 11th, 2021, and January 13th, 2021 meeting minutes. Can I get a motion for approval, please?
I would move that we approve all the minutes as presented.
A motion by, that was Ms. McDowell, correct?
And I will second that, Mr. Dashner.
Second by Kennedy. Any discussion? Ms. Ertel, can you call the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Schwegler.
Yes.
I vote yes. Mr. Kennedy.
Yes.
Mr. Dashner.
I vote yes.
Ms. McDowell.
Yes.
Mr. Leftwich.
Oh, yes.
And Mr. Abate.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 7-0. Item 10 on our agenda is the approval of bills. We have the November 2020 prepaids, December 2020 prepaids, January 2021 AP bill run, January 2021 bond bills, November 2020 wires and ACH transactions, December 2020 wires and ACH transactions, November 2020 revenue report, and the December 2020 revenue report. Can I get a motion for their approval?
I will make a motion to approve the bills as presented.
I'll second that.
I will second.
Okay, we'll give that motion by Schwegler, second by Mr. Abate. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Zertel, can you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Dashner.
I vote yes.
Mr. Kennedy.
I vote yes.
I vote yes. Mr. Schwegler.
Yes.
Mr. Abate.
Yes.
Mr. Leftwich.
Yes.
And Ms. McDowell.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 7-0. Item 11 on our agenda is the teacher recommendations for hire. Is this you, Mr. Archibald, handling this?
Yes, it is. Thank you, President Dashner. We have 2 vacancies that have been filled. These vacancies were due to resignations. The first is our new hire is Leslie Miller. It actually started in December. Leslie Miller has over 10 years experience at the elementary level, teaching in both Boston and Canada. Relocated to Michigan and is returned back to the workforce to our pleasure. She was a guest teacher at Kent Lake Elementary School early in the year, and we're delighted now to have her as part of the team over at Sayre. The second vacancy is Caitlin Wickham, Pearson kindergarten class. Caitlin Wickham is familiar to the district. She did her student teaching, second grade classroom at Pearson Elementary last fall, and the 4-year-old room at the Early Childhood Center in the spring of last year. So she is delighted to be returning to Pearson, and we are fortunate to have both of these individuals permanently amongst our ranks. And I ask the board approve the hiring of these 2 educators effective on the dates indicated.
I will move to approve the recommendations to hire Ms. Miller and Ms. Wickham.
I will second that.
So there's a motion by Mr. Kennedy, second by Mr. Leftwich. Is there any discussion? Okay, Mrs. Zertel, can you call the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Kennedy.
I vote yes.
I vote yes. Mr. Schwegler.
Yes.
Mr. Dashner.
I vote yes.
Mr. Abate. Mr. Abate.
Yes. I'm sorry. I didn't unmute. My apologies.
That's okay.
I'm used to calling these out, not waiting.
Ms. McDowell
Yes.
and Mr. Leftwich.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. I'd like to welcome Ms. Miller and Ms. Wickham to the district. Be nice if we could have met you in person like we normally do, but unfortunately, these are the times. Next item, 12, is policy 5002, budget planning and adoption. I'm guessing because Ms. Witt showed up on the screen, she's going to present it.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Dashner. The 2021 budget amendment number 1 was presented at the December 14th board meeting and was not within the parameters of board policy 5002, stating the district fund balance will be maintained at the level of 10% of total general fund expenditures with an allowable variance of plus or minus 1%. The administrative recommended action is to temporarily suspend the policy language contained in policy 5002 under business policies from 10% plus or minus 1 and allow for the district fund balance to be maintained at 11% plus or minus 1 for the 2020-21 school year.
Okay, can I get a motion, please?
I will move to suspend the policy language and maintain the fund balance at 11% plus minus 1% for this next year.
I'll support.
Okay, motion by Mr. Kennedy, supported by Mr. Schwigler. Discussion?
I have some questions. I'm sure I'll get more of this information and hopefully maybe the next time a finance committee is there and maybe I'm there. But I know there's a lot of uncertainty for next year, I assume, that's built into this, and thus the need to be ultra conservative and not forcing us to stay within board policy, correct?
That is correct from the last meeting at the finance committee where the finance committee reviewed the budget and maybe the option of offering some sort of catch up and recovery additional expenses to get caught up from online learning. So we're trying to be conservative this year because we don't know what's in the next year. That is correct.
Okay, so let's assume that we come out with a rosy outcome and there really is a lot of additional revenues in the budget. Is there any consideration or has there been any discussion about any of the extra out-of-pocket expenses teachers may have incurred this year that might be able to be reimbursed? Assuming, again, there's more than anticipated.
That hasn't been a topic of the finance committee, but it can be. The state CREC, which is state consensus revenue estimating conference, was just last Friday. The financial outcomes much better than they thought they looked. So the finance committee can go in that direction on discussing on what the final amended budget should be and what it should be.
Okay, yeah, and I'm just trying to think, a little bit long term, that if we really have this much of a surplus because we didn't see a lot of the negative that we thought we might get because we were told prepare for this, maybe that's something we can consider doing. So I guess I'll bring that up, assuming I'm on finance, next time we have one of those meetings to look at that. All right, thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Witt. We ended up, or we're ending up at 11.05% as opposed to the 11%, which would be the upper limit. So while this is not necessarily a bad thing, this just puts us over
Correct
what that magic number is instead of being under where we initially thought we would be, at least at this point, with the count and with the funding that we have from the state. So would it be safe to say that while it looks good right now, we still have time to wait to see what this budget really looks like in the next few months?
Yeah, we will definitely get a lot more information in the next few months. And yes, budget amendment number 1 gives us a projected fund balance of 11.05%. So it's only that 0.05% of total general fund expenditures that is requiring us to temporarily suspend. And we will have one more 2020-21 budget amendment at the end of the year. So if it was the direction of the finance committee and the board to lower that projected fund balance to back to 10 plus or minus 1, we could do that again before the year end.
Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Leftwich?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Witt, by my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, the state law is that districts maintain a fund equity of 5%. And I guess my question is, how long, as I'm new here, how long has South Lyon had this board policy in effect, this 10% board policy?
I'm sorry, Mr. Leftwich. I'm kind of new too. I'm not even in 2 years in, so I'm not. But I believe it's had a fund balance policy for quite some time. I don't know if any other of the Mr. Abate maybe knows. Has it been here as long as you've served on the board?
It has, yeah. It predates me, and it's, we've had these moments like tonight where we've had to make these adjustments here and there, and it's and you probably know, Mr. Leverage, it was set to be to give us more of a cushion, because 5% would be pretty, we'd be running a pretty narrow there, and it'd be kind of risky for us. So I think it's we just put us in a healthier spot. But yeah, it definitely is before the 6 years I've been here.
The state requirement too is to maintain above 5%, or once a public school district hits 5% of total general fund expenditures in their fund balance, they go into what they call an early warning, and which requires the district to submit financials and plans to the state of Michigan on a monthly basis. So school districts can fall to 5%, but if they do, they go into this early warning system with the state, and they're basically on the state's watch, and we have to submit monthly financials, get approvals, when typically we wouldn't if we're maintaining above a 5% fund.
Understood. Thank you. I was really more concerned about how long South Lyon had been adhering to this particular policy, and thank you for answering my questions.
Okay, is there any further discussion or questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I have two things actually. So the first would be just, Ms. Witt, could you provide a little bit of clarification or reminder about the rationale for districts having extra funds available? I think it has something to do with how the school district budget lines up compared to the state budget.
There is no requirement necessarily at the state level. You have to have a positive fund balance. And if you hit below 5% fund balance, then you go into that early warning stage. I've heard the state recommend that school districts should shoot for a 15% fund balance. And it gives you a rainy day fund necessarily. From my understanding, like I said, I haven't been here that long either. From my understanding of why this policy sits where it is the board doesn't necessarily want to grow the fund balance too big, because they want to give the money back to the education of our students. They don't want to hoard it necessarily, but you also want to be fiscally responsible in case things come up where you need to dip into your fund balance, because some years it does happen where unexpected big expenses come up and you don't want to drop to that 5% range, because it actually costs the district more to do a lot more with the state and the reporting and stuff like that. Did that answer your question, McMahon?
Yeah, it does help. I thought that it had more to do with just the timing and different calendars for school budgets and the state budget being revised in October. I don't know, revised not the right word, but okay. My other question was just more of a statement to echo what Mr. Schwegler said about being concerned teachers not being reimbursed or getting that usual $100 that they're accustomed to, and that wasn't given to them this year, and that it also wasn't given to them without notice, or at least the teachers felt like they were not notified that they wouldn't be getting those money this year, especially considering the extra supplies and equipment, doc cams and things like that the teachers had to pay for out of pocket to feel efficient in their classroom and delivery.
Okay, are there any further comments or questions?
Yeah, I did want to make one comment for the newer board members. Granted, I've only been on the board a couple years myself, but in a couple of board amendments that we've gone through, usually we're voting to lower that percentage. So we have had issues and areas where we've had to dip into that rainy day fund to make sure that we're balanced. So I kind of had to read this 3 or 4 times to make sure I was understanding that we were going to 11%, and that there wasn't an extra 1 added to that, because in most times that we've done an amendment, we've gone down. I want to say in maybe the first year I was on, we were down to maybe 6 or 7%, 7 or 8%. And I think last year we were, nervous about going even lower with the budget. Obviously, that going higher is a good thing than lower, but it is nice, especially with us being a low-funded district, to have that extra few dollars in the kitty, so to speak. Definitely helpful when we come across areas of need. So just a little bit of background for those that were asking the questions on why the percentage. And I know, Ms. Witt, you had mentioned that there's some districts that go 15%, and I can't name them off the top of my head, but there's a handful of districts that I know. I want to say they're more affluent districts that have higher per pupil foundation allowances, and as well as districts that can millage, which are very few based on the Prop A law, that actually have like a 15% and higher fund balance. But that would be a stretch for us, I think. But I am very pleased to see that we are a little bit higher, because normally we're voting for something lower.
Mr. Tell, I'd like to thank you for that background. I was making the assumption that if we can vote to suspend the language to go above the 10%, that we could also do it to go below, and I appreciate the background on that as well.
And the one comment I'll make that tags on to that, last year when we were trying to pass the initial budget for this school year, we were dipping heavily into the fund balance because of the unknown of what the funding was going to be. And that's kind of the same approach the discussions in the finance committee took is, could we spend 0.05% of the balance and get within policy? Yes. But when we're looking at the uncertainty of next year, and we hadn't seen a revenue estimating conference yet, and there's still a question as to what enrollment's going to look like in the future, all of those things combined could leave us in a pretty severe deficit for next year. So having a little bit extra money is a little bit of a cushion for next year with all the unknowns that are out there. Anything further? Okay, we do have a motion by Mr. Kennedy and a second by Schwegler. Mrs. Ertel, can you call the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Abate.
Yes.
Mr. Leftwich.
Yes.
Mr. Schwegler.
Yes.
Ms. McDowell.
Yes.
I vote yes. Mr. Dashner.
I vote yes.
Mr. Kennedy.
I vote yes.
Okay, motion passes 7-0. Our next item, number 13, is budget amendment number 1. Ms. Witt, I assume you're presenting that as well?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Dashner. The agenda item was presented at the December 14th, 2020 board meeting. The amendment was reviewed with the Finance Committee and no changes were requested. This amendment is not within the parameters of Board Policy 500 of 10% plus or minus 1 for the 2021 year. Administrative recommendation is to approve the 2020-21 budget amendment number 1 as presented.
Can I get a motion for approval?
I'll move to approve the budget amendment number 1.
Support.
Okay, and a motion by Mr. Abate, support by Mr. Tell. Discussion? Crickets tonight. Okay, hearing none. Mr. Tell, will you call the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Kennedy.
I'll vote yes.
Mr. Schwegler.
Yes.
I vote yes. Mr. Dashner.
I vote yes.
Mr. Leftwich.
Yes.
Mr. Abate,
Yes.
and Ms. McDowell.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 7-0. That'll bring us to item 13B, meeting dates. Mr. Abate, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, so thanks for adding this, and I feel a little sheepish even to suggest, because I certainly don't feel that the world revolves around me in any way, shape, or form. But quite simply, I find myself in a situation where I have a career-related conflict that's going to prevent me from meeting with South Lyon on Monday nights. And I think it's really well known how important this work is to me and how much it means to me to be a part of your team, and how seriously I take the responsibility that we've been entrusted with, to lead in these roles. And I've just been reelected. So the last thing I want to do is certainly to leave my seat. So I was hoping to make a motion, and I hope that you'll consider it, to change our regular meeting nights to Tuesdays instead of Wednesdays, so that I can stay with you and we can continue the work that we do together. So I would move that we amend our dates to Tuesday evenings.
Support.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Abate to move our meetings to Tuesday nights from the Monday nights are currently scheduled. I assume unless there's some type of a holiday conflict, it would just move to the next day that we currently have planned on our schedule. Is there any discussion, questions, comments?
Only one for me, as long as it isn't the fourth Tuesday of the month. I'm completely fine with that, because the world does not revolve around me and my schedule either. So I'm fine with that. Because we usually do the second Monday of the month, the first Monday of the month.
Well,
That's typically our schedule, correct?
I think I gotta look at it again.
I mean, I think we're just shifting everything one day.
First and third.
Yeah,
First-
it doesn't.
Yeah, first and third, right?
That should be fine.
Now we'll go, so Tuesday of the first and the third weeks of the
First and
month.
third
Correct?
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
Just so happens, Tony, that revolving around your schedule actually makes my schedule easier. So I'm all for it.
Well, I thank you. Thank you for that. I really want to be with you guys.
Okay, any further discussion?
I just want to say congratulations to Mr.
Thank
Abate.
you. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mrs. Ertel, can you call the roll, please?
Yes. Ms. McDowell,
Yes.
Mr. Dashner,
I vote yes.
Mr. Leftwich,
Yes.
Mr. Kennedy,
I vote yes.
Mr. Abate.
Yes.
I vote yes, and Mr. Schweigler.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Many thanks. I owe you all.
Our next agenda will have all of the proper dates adjusted in it. That brings us to section B of our meeting, information and inquiry. Item number 14, administration. The first item we have is Great Lake Bombers Facility Use Group Classification Request, which will be Stacy Witt, and this is being brought to the board for information. No action will occur tonight.
Yes. The Great Lakes Bombers have submitted a request to the district to be approved as a Group 3A in our facility use procedures. Since the school district recognizes that the primary purpose of school facilities is to implement the instructional programs for all students, the Board of Education has approved the classifications of Group 1, Group 2, Group 3A, Group 3B, and Group 4 based on priority for the purpose of allowing the scheduling usage of school facilities. For each group, there is a different usage fee, structure, as well as different requirements. In order for an athletic league to obtain Group 3A status, the organization must be approved by the board and meet the administrative guidelines that include, but are not limited to, the following requirements. Qualifies as a nonprofit organization, includes 2 or more teams. All travel teams have at least 75% South Lyon residency, has a governing body or board, has written bylaws, constitution rules, and/or regulations, and possesses public liability and property damage insurance as stipulated by the administration. Great Lakers Bombers has submitted all of these requirements and is being presented to the board for information tonight and will be on the agenda for approval of a Group 3A status at the February 1st, or now it might be February 2nd, 2021 board meeting.
Okay, does anyone have any questions or comments?
I have some questions. So in looking at the groups already approved for Group 3A status, there are a couple, what I think are pretty well-known clubs that I don't see in there that happen to also use our baseball diamonds and softball fields. South Lyon Thunder, South Lyon Stealth, both travel teams, both do seem to meet the 75% in district on their rosters. So why consider this group without those, and what other kind of stresses does that put on our fields because of all the other groups already using them?
So we do have additional groups that are not listed in Group 3A. So if you're actually looking at the procedure document and the policy, the groups listed under 3A are the teams and leagues that have actually gone to the board for approval. And what happens is they get priority over Group 3B teams and over Group 4 teams. So these other teams that you're seeing that aren't listed in 3A do have the right, but they're paying higher usage fees to rent our facilities, and they're not getting priority as Group 3A. So Group 3A status gives them priority in scheduling our facilities over anybody in Group 3B or Group 4, and they have a lower fee structure of paying to rent our facilities as well when they're in Group 3A than they do in Group 3B. Group 4.
Is there a quick, easy way to review that list?
I can get that list to you. The list of what?
All of the teams as part of Group 3A, or are they already listed?
Group 3A, I believe I shared with you. I have a list of who's been approved in Group 3A right now. We don't have a specific list for Group 3B or Group 4 because they don't have to go to the board for approval. So it just lists their requirements, and what they submit to us, we place in their group, and that's where they get priority on the facility use rental schedule. And depending on how much they paid, depending on what group they fall into. If they want to go into Group 3A and get higher priority with lower fees, they have to go and submit all of these things and get by the board to be listed under Group 3A. Does that make sense?
It does, but I guess what I'm seeing is that we don't have, what's in our agenda is not an all-inclusive list of all of 3A. That's what I'm trying to figure out. If that's all of the 3A groups, or if there are more you just didn't list.
No, those are all of them.
Okay.
So the entire list of Group 3A that the board that has gotten board approval in prior years, and nobody has gone for approval of Group 3A in many, many years. So Chris and I had to go through this with a fine-tooth comb to figure out what steps we had to take to get them into 3A as they were applying to be. Group 3A currently is South Lyon Area Recreation Authority, South Lyon Boys Lacrosse Club, South Lyon Junior League, Panthers, South Lyon Soccer Club, Mad Cats, South Lyon Travel Basketball, South Lyon Adult Co-ed Softball League, and South Lyon Special Olympics. Those are the only groups that have ever petitioned the board for approval to be in Group 3A.
Aren't the Stealth and Thunder part of Junior League?
I don't know who Stealth and Thunder is.
It's a softball and baseball travel league. And I should know this, but I don't know the answer.
I think they're part of Junior League because I have a couple friends there in that group, and I thought we don't do baseball. My son thinks it's very boring, so we got out of baseball long ago. But I thought that Stealth and Thunder were part of the Junior League, which is why they would, have that 3A
are those
listing.
Are those two travel teams? Are those two?
I'm not sure what the designation is, but
Yes.
If in my quick understanding, I don't know who those names are, but they're not listed in 3A. But my first assumption would be that those are team names that are a part of the
junior league.
junior league, and the junior league has been approved. So because they're a part of the junior league, then they're a 3A group. Does that make sense? That would be my first assumption, but I can follow up on that.
My wife writes that check. So in full disclosure, my daughter's on the stealth. So I'm pretty sure that's the check that she writes it to, is the junior league. So I guess here's my big concern is this. A, do we have the capacity to add more scheduling to our facilities? And are we already keeping up with the maintenance for those facilities? Or is this going to put more stresses on us where we might not get enough funding back to recover from that?
And those are all questions that Chris and I can follow up on and give you answers to before you guys actually vote on it next board meeting.
I would like that information before I vote, because I don't want to overburden our facilities, knowing that the population's grown so much over the last decade and a half. I don't want to add that extra burden if we don't have the ability to absorb the capacity.
Absolutely.
I think Dan's question leads into something that I was wondering about. And this may be a question that Mr. Dashner, you can answer for me. Was this something that would normally go to the facilities committee? Like, has it been through that committee? This seems like.
That's not what board policy states. Board policy states that it has to have board approval to be officially named a Group 3A status.
So even the process of like discussing it for consideration, that there's no recommendation that it goes through committee first?
That's not what the policy states. So I think where facilities would come into play is if they wanted to change board policy to have it directed to the facility committee first, then they could do that. Then that would have to go to the policy committee and then to the board for approval to change the policy. But the way the policy reads is if they submit these things for approval as a Group 3A, it goes to the board for board approval.
Okay.
And to add to that, from, I guess, the standpoint of the facilities and grounds committee, our time is very much chewed up with the bond planning that's going on right now. We've got routine meetings every couple of weeks, and we're generally running long on all of those. So trying to carve time out for something like that would be difficult right now. And I think the bond needs the attention. The one thing I would like to ask Ms. Witt, well, were you done, Ms. McDowell? I don't want to cut off any of your.
I did have another question. Thank you. The proof that a group like this needs to submit includes, it has bylaws and it has an organization, it has structure. The one of the things that it has to prove is that this is a travel team, the Bombers.
It's a travel league.
Okay, I'm sorry. My kid's 7, so we don't do we don't do sports yet. When do they have to submit evidence that at least 75% of that all teams and that was included? Okay, so I just didn't see it in our enclosures.
No, we decided to omit. They did submit a roster, and we can and I can go over that with you at a later date. But it had student names, coach names, addresses, phone numbers, personal information that we didn't want to put in a public board packet, but they did submit all of that information to verify their 75% residents.
Okay. And so, like, I guess since it doesn't go to committee, like, you verify that all these people in the roster live in district. And then, okay. And then same with the insurance, like they submit that and you verify that.
Well, it's a liability insurance certificate.
Right. So they provide that to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And they've submitted all the required documents.
Okay. Thank you. This, for disclosure, like, Mr. Lefwich and I went to this 7-hour training on Saturday, and it was very clear that, like, boards don't necessarily get into the weeds of this. So I'm just like having some cognitive dissonance that, like, we're getting asked like some pretty detailed stuff. And I'm just wrestling with that. So thank you for your patience. And Thank you, Mr. Dashner, for the time.
You're welcome. I'd be curious, and I know I've heard before that both the Panthers and the South Lyon Junior League have contributed to maintenance and upkeep of our facilities at times and do things to help that. I'd be curious how many of the other organizations have done that. And then this is probably one you can answer now, but my assumption is once this organization is on this list, they're on the list, and there's really no mechanism in place unless we condition our approval that would yearly verify that that residency requirement maintains throughout the years. Otherwise, they would just be on the list and that residency wouldn't be checked year to year, correct?
That is correct. We don't necessarily check the residencies from year to year. I'm sorry. But we can do that if the board requests to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I have two quick questions. So the Group 3B organizations, well, let me put it this way, the Group 3A organizations, do they still follow the same requirements as the Group 3B? The 6 pieces?
I guess I'm not sure what your question is.
So the difference between the Group 3A and the Group 3B is that the 3B groups do not get a board approval, therefore they don't get priority to the sites and they pay a higher fee.
Correct.
Okay, so they still follow the nonprofit organization, 2 or more teams, 75% residency, governing body, laws, constitution, and possess the insurance, correct?
In the policy, it states that South Lyon travel teams in Group 3B classification must have at least 75% community members in the group. Proof must be provided in the form of a roster if requested. In the event that 75% threshold is not met, Group 4 rules and rates will apply. So they do not have to have all of the requirements 3A.
Okay.
That 3 Group B does. Does that make sense?
I think so, yes.
So they have to meet that 75% residency list. And we would request those things as they apply for their facility use in that year. So when they request facility use, that's when we would require those things to be submitted. Submit your roster showing 75% residency, but
Okay.
they don't have to qualify. They don't have to prove to us that they're a non-qualified or a nonprofit organization. They don't have to have a governing board or body. So there are additional requirements to be considered as a Group 3A that we don't require in a Group 3B.
Okay, and this is a new group asking to come in as a 3A group as opposed to a 3B group. Because I don't know the procedure, this is not my forte. Do Group 3Bs often ask to move up to the 3A level, or is that uncommon?
No, it hasn't been done in a long time. Chris Bollinger said he has never had anybody request to move into a 3A. So all of the teams that are listed in a Group 3A right now were actually done under when the district had a director of operations that Chris reported to, which was many, many, many years ago. He told me his name. I can't remember it. I'm sorry. But it's been a long time since somebody's requested to be a Group 3A status.
Okay, so the Bombers are a new group coming in, asking to come in as a 3A.
Correct. I think they've been using our facilities as a 3B. They've gotten all their documentation because they want priority status with all these other teams that have applied in previous years to be a Group 3A.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification, since this is out of, I don't have students in sports either, so this is learning for me as well. Thank you.
I've got a couple of comments, questions, and I think, Eric, you confused me a little bit. So
I probably did.
Yeah. I guess I'm going back and forth from listening and reading what was sent over to us, and I guess I'm not 100% sure the exact difference between 3A and 3B, because they both say nonprofit 75% residency. Is there a difference in what constitutes nonprofit? Are there levels of nonprofits that put you in a different level of 3A to 3B in terms of nonprofit?
Yes,
And then
I'm
if you have the
confused.
75% residency,
I guess I'm getting confused on where you're seeing that 3B has to be the same requirements. Because in whatever I sent you, it talks about 3B being nonprofit travel team that meets 75 and are not directly affiliated with an organization listed in group 3A. But right underneath that, it says in order for an athletic league to obtain 3A status, has to submit all of those things. But that does say that under the 3B. I was just verbatim reporting to you guys what the policy says.
right.
So
That's
in the
not
policy,
That's where I'm confused because it says 3B, the first line says nonprofit travel teams that meet 75% and directly affiliated with it, are not directly affiliated with the 3A group. And then it says in order to go to 3A, you have to qualify as a nonprofit, which I just read under 3B, 2 or more teams, 75% residency, governing board, written bylaws. I don't know if maybe there's the governing board and the bylaws are what's different, but I would imagine if it's a nonprofit, you'd have to have that.
Liability insurance. And I don't think, I think in group 3B, we just take their word that they're a not-for-profit. If they want to go to 3A, they need to qualify as a nonprofit organization. They have to
Okay,
prove
so
that to us.
you're looking for actual physical paperwork to get to
Correct.
3A as opposed to just someone coming in and saying, we're a nonprofit. Okay, great. We take your word for it. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So now I'm unconfused. The original comment that I had, I guess I'm a little bit concerned because again, I do know kind of what Mr. Dasher had mentioned that, a couple of the groups in 3A have put forth a lot of partnerships with the school in terms of finance and resources, whether it's upkeep, putting lines down, helping to pay for backstop fencing replacement or new replacement and everything. So it kind of, to me, it shows that 3A group, and I don't know how many of them participate. I know the soccer, my son does soccer, and I know that, the soccer team has done quite a bit of, work here and there on stuff. I think Junior League and Panthers have done, significantly more. I think they have a bit more money in their bank account to help out with that kind of stuff. But it just really shows a true community attachment and commitment to, to the district and to the community as a whole. That's my only concern is, it's like, I don't want to, have all these years of where we've accepted and then, make it harder for these teams to be able to play on the fields. Just a comment.
Okay, if there's nothing further, we'll move on to item B, extended COVID-19 learning goal reporting, January 2021. And Mrs. Kudwa is here to present that to us.
Thank you, President Dashner. And Chester, I believe, will be sharing the presentation, and I'm joined by both curriculum coordinators tonight, Ms. Ingbloom and Mrs. Weber. So we will be sharing a bit about that as well, too. And I know you were all here for the study session last week. We are recapping a couple of those key points, as we know that most community members will look to tonight's presentation for the entire story, and we wanted to make sure it was all together. So there are some things I will go very quickly through on the slides because you all have seen them and we spoke to them at the study session last week. Shasta, am I able to get that presentation shared?
I was never given a presentation.
I shared that with you and Jeff today. Chris Pointer Kelly, could one of you reshare, please? Thank you. I can speak to some of the key points while we are waiting for that. Sorry for that. So as we shared last week, the return to learn legislation requires a few things out of local districts as part of this school year. So first, the district had to establish educational goals for reading and for mathematics. We needed to pick a benchmark assessment that was aligned to state standards and give that assessment to all students in grades K through 8 in the first 9 weeks of school, and again before the end of the school year. And as we shared last week, we do have some grades that will be doing a mid-year assessment as well. And our district approved assessment is NWEA's MAP Growth, which is one that we have a history with as a local district already. So we are required to give 2 progress reports along with that. We are required to do the first one before February 1st. So I'm awfully glad we got it in at this meeting before the meeting moved to February 2nd. And the other one will be before the end of the school year. And then we will post this to the district's transparency portion of the website as well. And then that must report on either achievement or growth for students in those areas. So as we shared, we're sharing tonight the initial data from the fall administration, and we will share some growth data later on in the school year as well too. So we do have those 2 educational goals for our district. The first is related to reading. So by the end of the 2021 school year, all students will demonstrate growth in reading from fall to spring, as measured by an increase in Rit Score on NWEA's MAP Growth Reading Assessment. And then goal 2 is all students will demonstrate growth in mathematics from fall to spring as measured by an increase in Rit Score on the NWEA MAP Growth Math Assessment. So those are the 2 goals we set forth as a district that we are striving to meet this school year. And then we'll speak a little bit to the test administration window. So Chester, it's a little bit further in, please. So we did have 3 administration windows that we set forth as a district. That first one met with that first few weeks of school, so September to early November. We are in the middle of the second administration now for grades K through 8, January and February, and then we will assess again in spring between April and May. And that district level data is only available when we close that window. So because we're in the middle of that second administration, we are not able to share the mid-year scores at this time because we still have students that are taking that assessment. So we will have further data to share at the end of the school year and the second progress report. So we talked a little bit last week about what is the MAP growth assessment and why is our district using that. So again, that history that we have as a district, K through 5th grade has taken that assessment since the fall of 2017. Students in 2nd grade initially took the K through 2 assessment. We did move them over to the 2 through 5 assessment. So as we're looking at comparison data, Mr. Dashner had requested that we look from that fall to fall comparison. So when you're looking at those charts later this evening or as you're continuing to go over them, just be aware that they did take a different assessment, and we have a footnote to that chart as well too to point that out, but they did change which assessment we gave them. So 2nd grade can either go with the lower elementary assessment option or the upper elementary option, and we initially started all of ours in that lower L scale, and then we moved them over because it seemed like it was a better fit within our district. Can you advance in the slides, please? To the history of, a few more in. Perfect. And then grades 6 through 8 began in the fall of 2018, and high school did begin this year. So we had planned already, as we shared last week, to include 9th grade. They had already opted to use that assessment with their students. We did add in 10, 11, and 12 as well too, and CARES funding did pick up 11th and 12th grade to be funded for this year. We are not planning to administer that at this time for 11th and 12th graders again in the spring. They'll have other assessments that they'll be taking, but we did want to have that initial data available for staff to be able to use. So we did make sure that they had that as well too. As far as the assessment experience, all of the students have a unique test. So if I was taking that test alongside 2 or 3 classmates, my test is going to look different than the test my classmates are taking. The test is computer adaptive. I'm sorry, next slide. The test is computer adaptive, so there's no floor and no ceiling. It's going to adjust to where the student answers. We talked a little bit about the fact that if you're working through that test, when it meets you at your right instructional level, you're going to miss about 50% of those questions because it's constantly calibrating to see where your instructional level will be. Students can expect again to miss that about 50%. And for kindergarten and 1st grade, it is read out loud to them so that it's easier for them to progress through. And the styling of the test is a little bit different. It's a little bit more age appropriate Teachers can receive back classroom data on each individual student within 24 hours of that assessment being completed for the student. It just takes a little longer for us to get that district level data, but it's available pretty timely for classroom teachers. Next slide. And we talked last week as well too about that Rit score. So again, that's used to kind of compare growth over time. So we can see from early elementary all the way through high school how a student is growing over time, which is the power of a test like this. And then that really helps us to identify where is the student's zone of proximal development, where are they ready for the next instructional moves. Students receive that overall score for reading and for math, but they're going to get sub-scores within those areas as well too, so teachers can see all of that information, families can see that information as well too. Next slide. And then a student does get a percentile rank as well too, so that's going to help indicate where the student kind of falls across their grade level peers who had the same number of weeks of instruction as far as where they're falling. So the norms for this are updated every 5 years. And we did talk last week that the norms just got updated for MAP growth. And so we have new norms we're working with. So that does adjust a little bit how the comparisons work from previous years to this year. So this year, 2020 just seems to be one of those years where everything is hitting all at once. So the norming would have naturally happened here. And unfortunately, it's happening at a time when that comparison is pretty meaningful for us to be able to make across years. So you'll see in a minute, we're still doing okay, but it would have been great if it didn't happen to hit at this particular year. It just makes that comparison a little bit more challenging for us. Next slide, please. And then our classroom teachers are using that data in a lot of different ways. So first, it is a good predictor for how students may perform on the MSTEP, the PSAT, and the SAT. It's one additional source that we can use with our state and local assessments. It's nationally normed, so it helps kind of put the work that we're doing as a district into a context. And then there are important reports that can help with things like IEP meetings and developing what might be good supports for particular students, so student support plans, classroom instructional decisions. So all of those pieces are utilizing the score reports that we have from NWEA so that we can really make sure we're targeting what is necessary for our students as they move forward in their development. So within that, we really work to make sure we're building the appropriate supports for individual students. So that might include weekly instructional support time for students or small groups. It's helping us figure out who needs what learning as a group. And then it's one piece of data we use to inform those system-wide decisions as well too, as far as curriculum and instruction. And there are some factors outside of our control this year. NWEA did adjust those norms. So again, that is going to sometimes make it difficult to do that year-to-year comparison. And again, we could not control the testing environment for all of our students. Not all students took the fall test at school. Some took the fall test at home. The testing environment is just going to look different if it's not something we have control over. It could have been more distracting. It could have been less distracting. It could have students could have had more help than they would have had at the school in doing the assessment. So without being able to control that testing environment, I just want you to be aware that's one of those things that we're kind of looking at and taking into consideration as we look at student scores. For most students, it's still probably going to be a pretty good comparison. For some students, we are seeing either big ticks up or down in their assessment that don't necessarily match what we're seeing in the classroom. So we're just taking that with a grain of salt. So that's just kind of what we've shared with classroom teachers, to be aware that because the testing environment wasn't something we had control over in all situations, things may look a little bit different this year. So we do have our Return to Learn progress report. So in the attachment tonight, you have this presentation and then two separate documents. One speaks to what we're legally required to provide, and that will be posted to the transparency page. And then the other piece to that is really the follow-up to the questions asked by Mr. Dashner last week, that the board might like that fall-to-fall comparison. So within those reporting sections, we do have the grade level comparisons between the district and the national mean level RIT. So for both mathematics and reading, you see charts for each of those. And we have subgroup data, and we speak a little bit to what qualifies as a subgroup. So Again, the state standard for that is 30 students within a grade level in a particular subgroup. So as you or the community look through those subgroup reports, there may be times where you see kindergarten first and then third grade, and we've skipped over second. That's not an error on our part. That means there's less than 30 students in that grade level who would fall into that category. It is considered at that point to be something that might provide too much information about an individual student. So we wouldn't provide data on that subgroup if there's not at least 30 students within that subgroup at that grade level. So there are grades within this that you'll notice we've skipped over. That is intentional on our part because it was not a large enough subgroup to qualify. So we have subgroups within different ethnicities. We have subgroups for our students who are learning the English language. And then we have our economically disadvantaged and our special education subgroups as well too. So those charts that you were provided with for tonight and that will be posted to the transparency page, the first step is that grade level comparison. So we're reporting those scores for mathematics and then for reading. And it's important to note that we are above those national norms, the national means for all of the subjects and grade levels that we tested. So those norms were set pre-COVID, so we're still doing fairly well. Even with the COVID pandemic, we are still above the national averages. Within that subgroup data, we do have the following categories. So those ethnicities within our district, the ethnicities that had at least 30 students within them at a particular grade level were Asian, Hispanic, Latino, multi-ethnic, and then white. We have our economically disadvantaged, our English learners, and our special education. So that subgroup data is used by classroom teachers and buildings as they're looking through to see, are there things that we need to adjust or adapt? They're watching for those gaps between all students, the aggregate data, and then those subgroups. So they use that as they're planning for instruction. So that's how we will use that data. And that data is available within that report as well too. And then those two pieces are really the parts that are being posted to the transparency page. So the exact language within the legislation are those two pieces. So that's the part that we are sharing out in the transparency report. And that'll be posted after tonight's meeting, probably sometime tomorrow. And then the additional information that you requested, Mr. Dashner, that fall to fall comparison. So when we're talking of fall to fall comparison, we're not following a cohort of students across the years. So we're not looking kindergarten and then first and then second and third. We're really following, like, let's compare this year's third graders to previous third grade groups. So as you're looking at that chart, because we've been rolling out map growth over time, there are some places where there are blanks in that chart because we had not yet assessed that group of students using this particular assessment. So we were able to put it in where we had it, but again, that K1 assessment was reworked. So the fall to fall comparison is a little bit off. You'll notice there's a bump up actually for K1 this year. That has more to do with the new norming and with the testing environment and with the fact that the test itself changed in most cases than to do with, we have this this group of kindergartners and first graders who grew more than what we were anticipating, right? It's probably those other factors in this case that are coming into play. The norms were updated, so that direct year-to-year comparison is a little bit challenging in other grades as well too. But in general, the numbers are very comparable to where we've been at in the previous fall. So you'll notice in most cases, the scores are within a point or two on those Rit scores. So we're still in pretty close comparison as an aggregate group, as a district, to where we have fallen in previous falls. What questions do you have for our team? And Ms. Inglum and Ms. Weber, if you feel I left anything out, feel free to jump in.
I don't have a question per se, but I do want to say thank you for providing that data. I know there was a lot of concerns with trying to make the comparisons, and you went over those very well tonight, but I do appreciate you going through that effort for me.
Thank you, Mr. Dashner. Mr. Schwegler, did you have a question?
Yes, sorry to cut you off, Craig. You probably can't answer the question. So we see this aggregate data, And I think the general assumption is that there are those who are struggling worse this year because of the remote environment, and those who might be excelling more this year because of they learn better in a remote environment versus in person. Are you seeing, do you know if there's a bigger spread between maybe quartiles on the high and the low end? Are students, so where maybe the average is similar, are you seeing a bigger range of scores posted?
Mr. Schweigler, I could pull there is standard deviations for each grade level, so I can look at a comparison year over year on the standard deviations to look and see if the spread has changed over time. We didn't pull that specifically tonight, but I can get that for you.
That would be great. Thank you.
I have some questions, if others don't at the time. So for economically disadvantaged, is that defined as students who qualify for a free and reduced price lunch?
It is.
Okay. There are no grades in our district that have at least 30 students who are Black or African American.
That is correct.
By that way?
That is correct.
I did not know that. So you said that the 11th and 12th graders took this in the fall, but they'll be taking other assessments in the spring. So how are you measuring growth when you use two different instruments?
So the data collection for that group for this fall really was just intended for staff to be a here's where students are at and here's where gaps may exist from spring instruction. But we know that that group, particularly the 11th graders, has the SAT scheduled and coming. So this is a predictor for SAT. So it is data that's worth having. There is a correlation between those two. But staff did not feel like it was necessary, at least at this time, that is our decision, to add another assessment for 11th graders. And for 12th graders, we are not seeing the value in adding another assessment for them in April or May. At that point, they're preparing to move on to the next phase in their life. And then it's not necessarily something that they would want to spend part of their school time on.
Totally get it. It makes sense. So when we talk about like making sure that there is growth shown in 11th graders, that's really just relying on the state's assistance when the kids take like the PSAT and the SAT and the data. Okay.
Correct. And there is a nice correlation between this assessment and those, which is one of the reasons we value this assessment. So we should still be able to draw some inferences from that.
So how is growth defined on this? Like we're looking at how students did in the fall, and then we'll see how they're doing right now, and then we'll see how they do in the spring. But I think any reasonable person would assume that that students' scores would tend to grow up at some point. So do we compare South Lyon's mean growth compared to like a national mean growth over a year, or like how do you prove that something grew? Because it seems pretty obvious that it would grow some amount.
So we do get that trajectory for individual students as well too. So the average student that was scoring where you were scoring would grow this much over time. So you're able to look student to student to really kind of say like, are they staying on the growth path you would have anticipated for that student? Or is it less than the rate of growth you might have expected for that individual?
Right, but how do you make sure that the district is serving its students and that, you know, enough, however that's defined, kids are actually growing in that way?
So like Mrs. Kudrow was sharing, within the assessment itself, the assessment sets sort of growth trajectories for students. So that is calculated using all of the norming data as well. Teachers are also able to go in and adjust some of that so they can kind of move that up if they, if they think a student is progressing on a slightly different scale. The assessment will also tell us at the end of the year a percentage of students who met their growth trajectory. So we're able to look at it on an individual student basis, but then we're also able to look at it kind of on a larger scale across the district, across grade bands, to be able to see the percentages of our students that are meeting expected growth.
That helps a lot. Do we get data to compare how South Lyons, progress in that way compares to national norms or state norms?
So we do get national norming data. And then again, because those growth trajectories are essentially based off of all of that norming data that they've collected, they have told, like the organization itself, their researchers will tell you that you are shooting for approximately 50% of students to be making their growth trajectory, that is typically average. So if you're above that percentage, then it shows that your students are growing above what they would typically expect based on the national data.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Do we ever look at how students who are in the junior kindergarten program compared to students who are not in the South Lyon JK program, or maybe didn't have like any kind of, they didn't go to like a daycare or something? Like, is that any kind of like study that we do?
So we have not, to date, we have not pulled the data simply because the junior kindergarten program is so young. We were only within, I think are we only in year 3 at this point? So we did not do that the first year straight out of the gate, because last year would have been the first year that we had students who had experienced junior kindergarten. That is something that we will be looking at as we're going forward, and just to see, as part of what we are even considering in terms of just our own junior kindergarten curriculum, and looking at, are we adequately preparing our students for the kindergarten experience?
Okay. Those were all my questions. Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything? Okay, thank you, Ms. Kudwa, Ms. Weber, and Ms. Engblom. Sorry, I always get twisted saying that. Our next item is C, legislation. Mr. Archibald.
Nothing to report this evening.
Item D, CETA.
Yeah, I turned my camera off too quickly, apparently there, Steve. I didn't know you had no legislation. I do have a couple of items that I just want to make sure you're aware of and share. So typically this time of year, we're preparing for our kindergarten registration, and historically within our district, we have always done the registration paperwork process alongside a welcome event for our families, so they can see a kindergarten classroom, talk to kindergarten staff, meet the building principal, walk through the school. Given the pandemic and the conditions that we're in, we are splitting those two pieces. We are opening registration on the website starting at the end of January. So we will email out to current families and post on the website the process for enrolling a new kindergartner or junior kindergartner. But we will host that welcome event later in the year, probably sometime in late April, in the hopes that we can do something in person. So families, even if it's in smaller groups, may still hopefully have an opportunity to walk through a kindergarten classroom. It might not look like a typical kindergarten classroom looks in a normal year, but at least it would get them into the building and meeting some of the staff and the families. So our hope is that potentially we could host something if we delay that. So this year we are dividing up those two events. I wanted to make sure that the board was aware of that. And then I do always like to share junior kindergarten, as we talked about a moment ago, is in its 3rd year within our district. It has been a program that is highly sought after. I do want to share those age ranges just so that our public that is watching is aware. So for that junior kindergarten group, we are really targeting the people that fall within that waiver window. So that's September 2nd to December 1st, 5-year-old birthdays. So that group that would turn 5 after the school year potentially had started. If space permits, we work backwards to fill those additional spots. So we go in age order. We start with that December 1st and then work back to the end of November and keep filling spaces until we have filled all of the ones that we can. If a family requests a building and it is full before we get to their child's birthday, they go on a wait list and we work through that process. So we do plan on the deadline for that being February 19th this year. We only consider completed applications at that point in the process. So if a family has turned in part of their paperwork, but not all of it, they cannot be considered for junior kindergarten until the paperwork is complete. Obviously, we know not all of them will have had all of their immunizations yet. That's one of those pieces that they can add in later. But as far as the residency pieces, as far as the birth certificate, all of those pieces must be turned in advance. So we are planning on all of that paperwork process this year being done in the online model that we used over the summer. So this summer, parents could turn that in through a secure portal within our website. And then our staff were alerted as new documents were added. So building secretaries and our people services department were able to do the enrollment from there. It did really help to limit the number of people that were coming in and out of the school buildings for the enrollment process. And it worked very seamlessly for families. Uploading those documents was not terrible. So again, I just wanted to make sure you were aware we have split those two pieces that typically occur in one event into two separate events. And then, put in a plug for that junior kindergarten program. And the next question I always get is, where is that going next year? I typically don't know until we figured out a little bit of that kindergarten enrollment. So if you are a current district family and you know you've got an incoming kindergartner, it really does benefit our district that we know sooner that your child is planning to come for kindergarten. So please grab onto that paperwork when it launches at the end of January and make sure you are started in that process so that we can begin placing students. And then my next item is related because it typically comes out around the same time as kindergarten registration, and that's our resident open enrollment. You know that as previously being called school of choice. We did split that language last year. School of choice is language that's used consistently across the state when students are looking to join a district other than their home district, either that is within their own county or is within one of those counties that is contiguous, touching their county. So 105 or 105C, and school of choice always refers to that. We in our district had for a long time used the same language for transfers within our own elementary schools, for people that were our residents. The confusion started to happen of people not knowing which set of paperwork to turn in. So we did rename it within the district as resident open enrollment, just putting that plug back in there because it is a newer term that we are using. So I do want to make you aware, we did last year make a recommendation for Hardy, and I'm planning to carry that recommendation forward. Hardy is a popular building, or was in the past, for resident open enrollment because of its proximity to a lot of large subdivisions in our district. What ended up happening though was because Hardy is growing in their boundary, as well as adding students into our Blue Wing and our emotional impairment and cognitive impairment classrooms, we were running into class size issues at Hardy. So we made a recommendation last year that Hardy would close to new resident open enrollment families. So if you were already there, you had maybe a third and a fourth grader at Hardy for resident open enrollment, you could enroll your kindergartner, but we were not taking new families. So essentially allowing a family to phase out at Hardy if they were already existing resident open enrollment. We had the capacity to allow that, but we really did not have the capacity to continue adding new families. We also do allow families who have a student in that Blue Wing in one of those specialized programs to bring their other children from the district with them, as long as they can provide their own transportation, and staff can bring their children to any building within the district as well too. So that's a separate process from resident open enrollment. But again, we are not planning to take new resident open enrollment families at Hardy. Any questions on that? Mr. Lefwich?
Yes, thank you. Out of curiosity, did South Lyon this school year, 2021, experience a reduction in kindergarten enrollment due to the pandemic? And are we anticipating that we might have actually a massive increase next year for students who, or for families who might have held their students over for a year?
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it is than we've had. We have experienced this. We did on the years when the state was rolling back those dates where students could enroll. So it was December 1st, it kept rolling back. So we had smaller enrollments for a couple of years and then a bump in a year. And we weathered that just fine. We have enough classrooms that are either kindergarten or first grade classrooms that typically make that work. Just not everybody is always in a large kindergarten. Watch those sizes as we work through. But we may get a bump next year. We're aware of that. It's important that people turn that paperwork in early so we can plan. Teaching staff is a hot commodity here in the state of Michigan. So the sooner families tell us that they are planning to come to kindergarten, the better prepared we will be.
Thank you, Ms. Kudwa. Our next section is board committee reports. Legislative, that is empty right now with Mr. Clark's departure at the end of last year. Policy, Mr. Abate, is there anything new there?
We have not met just lately. I think that'll be coming shortly.
Okay. Finance committee, I'll report on that. Our last committee meeting was canceled because we had nothing new to report there. Facilities and grounds, Mrs. Ertel.
Yeah, so we had a meeting last week and we got an update from Barton Mallow and IDS. Some of the projects that they're actively working on is the elementary playgrounds. So Dolson, Salem, Sayre are getting some new equipment, upgraded equipment, or replacement equipment based on need, age, and maintenance if it's in need. We're also doing some flooring replacement at Kent Lake and Southline High School. So we got an update on that. And then some work has been turned over to Barton Mallow for next phases, which will be helpful for budgeting and estimating. Southline East Auxiliary Gym Addition, science labs at the high school, turf at East is actually out for bid right now. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I think that about covers it. And the pool at Southline High School. So they've made it to differing architectural phases, design phases. And at the end of each phase, they get sent to Barton Mallow to make sure that we're still on budget and estimates so that we don't get too far out in the process before we realize that the project is either out of scope or out of budget. Yep, so that's where we're at this point with the bond.
Thank you. Curriculum and communications, Mr. Kennedy.
We have not met yet this year recently. Our next, I closed that window. I believe we meet next month in February, if I am not mistaken.
Okay. Oakland Schools Diversity and Inclusion, Ms. Ertel.
I don't think we've had a meeting recently, or if we did, I was unable to make it. And my kind of partner in crime with that particular committee was Ms. Hanshaw, and since she is not on the board any longer, so I will keep my eyes out for the next meeting. Usually it's once per month.
Okay, and the Oakland County Health Department School Board updates, those have been getting fewer and further in between lately. I have not seen a meeting invite for one of those within the last several weeks, so there's nothing new to report there. That brings us to other. Is there any other to report? Okay, seeing none. Item 15, reports, Southline Education Foundation. Mr. Abate.
Yeah, I was unable to attend their latest meeting. I took a look at their agenda. They were talking about some future event planning stuff, but I'll get an update from them and I can get something out to you guys.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to item number 16, public comments. Mr. Kennedy, can you check the status of those?
Indeed, I can. We do have one more. It's in from Mr. Dean Wickham. He says, make sure I get it all on the screen here. Thank you for offering a second public comment section in your meetings. This looks like it's in regards to the junior league, the bomber travel team. 3A members are in some cases decades-long members of the community. Inclusion to this group should be difficult. The junior league, for example, runs house and travel programs that are often over 100 teams. Putting an independent travel organization like the Bombers on equal footing as it relates to scheduling will be harmful and will negatively impact the community. So that's the only comments, public comments that are on the list.
Okay, and item number 17 is correspondence. We have a letter of resignation from Ms. Mary Roman from the Southline High School Math Department. We wish her well in her new adventures. Item 18, which is our meeting dates, which are now all off by a day. Our next meeting agenda will have these corrected to be one day later than they currently are shown. And with that, we get to board comments. Mrs. Ertel, would you like to go first?
Yikes, I thought I would have a minute. I don't have anything specific. Welcome back to students, both the first week of remote and now back into hybrid and full on in person or 4 days a week at the elementary level. Good luck to all the secondary students who are in their last week of first semester. No matter what that may look like in terms of tests or assessments or catch up on assignments, and getting ready for their second semester of potential class changes. And thank you, and looking forward to the year of being the secretary.
Mr. Schwegler.
Just want to give a quick thank you to everyone who probably spent many, many hours preparing some of the items we had to look over today. So thank you for your hard work and providing us that information. Welcome to the new teachers. And that's all I have tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Leftwich.
Thank you very much. I would just like to say thank you for the opportunity to serve on this board, to the community for being elected to this position, and the welcome that I have received from Mr. Archibald and the sitting board members. And as Ms. McDowell made mention earlier, I got a little bit of an education on Saturday in a 7-hour board 101 class, and I look forward to the opportunity to serve the Southline community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. McDowell.
I just wanted to say congratulations to our new officers and thank you to Mr. Archibald for the kind words at the beginning. I wanted to say welcome to Ms. Miller and Ms. Wickham. And thank you to Ms. Roman for all of her years of service to South Lyons children. I read your letter, so thank you for that. I also wanted to say thank you to all our teachers always, but especially to the secondary social studies teachers in the last couple weeks. It's really horrible to have a day after with your students. And I can't imagine doing that virtually either, or a mix. So I just wanted to make space to say thank you and to honor those teachers for giving their students an environment where they felt comfortable to just be last week. So thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Kennedy.
I will echo with what everybody else this evening has had to say. Welcome to our new elementary teachers. Welcome to the family. Good luck to Mary Roman. Thanks for her years of service. We appreciate certainly everything she's done for her math students. We know how I am at math, so I admire a math teacher by any means. Thank you to my fellow board members, being this is January and Board Appreciation Month. I appreciate you, the work that you do, the candid discussions that we can have in doing what we do for our students. And thanks to everybody else who I am certain, our teachers and our staff, our administrators who have put in many hours over their winter break. many of us really don't take a break from our schoolwork that we do, and we do appreciate the time that we all put into that. Enjoy, stay safe. That's all I have. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Abate.
Yeah, so thanks, Mr. Archibald, for the nice words to start us out. Mr. Leftwich, Mrs. McDowell, it's really nice to have you. It's nice to be starting a brand new year and have our full board here. I'm excited about this group. It'll be really good. And, you know, and in terms of recognition, I mean, we've been rowing through a storm here for a little while, and it's not quite over. We got some big decisions still to make. They won't be easy. They won't please everyone, but I really admire the way everyone has handled that so far. And we'll keep persevering as a group and make the best decisions we possibly can in the best interest of kids. It's all we can do. So I appreciate all of you. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for the accommodation on the meeting nights. That's super helpful. I'm glad to still be with you. Welcome to our new teachers. Congratulations to our retiree. And that's all I have for tonight. Thanks so much.
And I'll close it out by saying, Mr. Kennedy, your parting gift as your outgoing interim president was not having to go after Mr. Abate tonight, because we all love having to go after him in board comments. But congratulations to the new teachers. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy, for your service as president for that short time period. And thank you, Mr. Abate, for your previous service and you know, allowing other people to step up to fill your slot while you're busy with other things. I want to wish any teachers that do get the slot for vaccine good luck. I was able to get my second shot today as a first responder for something I do outside of all of this, and didn't have any side effects with the first one, and going so far good on the second one. So hopefully you're able to get it if you're so inclined to get it, and go well with it. With that, I will look for a motion to adjourn for tonight.
I will move to adjourn.
Why don't I second?
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Abate, supported by Kennedy. Mrs. Ertel, can you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Abate,
Yes.
Mr. Schwegler,
Yes.
I vote yes. Mr. Kennedy,
Yes.
Mr. Dashner,
Yes.
Mr. Leftwich,
Yes.
and Ms. McDowell.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. We are adjourned at 8:48 p.m. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Great job, Craig.